The Strange Experiment. The Alien Academy was known across the galaxy as the place where young minds came to learn about the universe. Its halls were filled with strange voices, bright eyes, and curious questions. The Academy had students from 20 different species, each one proud of its culture, its history, and its survival. But on this day, there was one student who did not belong to the stars. He came from Earth, and his presence alone made every alien whisper. The human sat quietly at the back of the class. His name was Daniel. His posture was calm, his face relaxed, but everyone could feel something different about him. He was not like the other species who flinched when the instructor raised his voice. He was not like the others who avoided eye contact. Daniel's eyes were sharp, almost playful, as if he knew something no one else did. The alien instructor, Professor Veyron, decided that this was the day to test the human. For weeks, the professors had argued. Some believed humans were fragile and unprepared for the dangers of the galaxy. Others whispered that humans had something hidden inside them, some secret fire that let them survive in places no other species could. Today, Veyron would find out, the large lecture hall was filled with students. The lights dimmed, the sound system hummed. Professor Veyron spread his long arms and said in his deep voice, "Today, we will learn about predators." The aliens shifted uneasily in their seats. Predators were not just lessons in biology. They were nightmares, reminders of old times when their ancestors ran in fear. When survival meant hiding in caves and praying the hunters passed by, Veyron turned to Daniel. "Human, I want to see how you respond." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Respond to what?" His voice was steady, almost bored. The professor pressed a button, and the first sound filled the room. It was a low growl, deep and guttural. The kind of sound that made skin crawl and spines shiver. The alien students gasped. Some pressed their ears shut. Others pulled back as if claws might leap from the speakers at any moment. The growl rose into a screech, sharp and violent, echoing across the hall like death itself. Every alien in the room trembled. Some of the younger ones nearly cried. But Daniel, the lone human, leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms and smirked. The professor narrowed his eyes. "You are not afraid." Daniel gave a small laugh. "Afraid? That's just a cougar." His words spread across the room like fire. Aliens turned to each other, confused. A cougar? What was that? The word meant nothing to them. How could the human call such a terrifying sound just anything? Veyron frowned. "Explain." His voice carried anger but also curiosity. Daniel shrugged. "On Earth, cougars live in the mountains and forests. They stalk deer, sometimes even humans if they're desperate. That sound you just played, it's the same as a cougar's scream. We hear it when we go camping, when hikers walk alone. It's not a nightmare for us. It's just part of life." The class erupted into whispers. Aliens stared at Daniel as if he had admitted to living in a world full of monsters. To them, predators were extinct memories. They studied them from holobooks, safe behind walls in cities. The idea that humans still lived side by side with such creatures was impossible. Professor Veyron studied Daniel closely. He expected fear. He expected the human to shrink like the others. Instead, he saw calm eyes, even a hint of amusement. He realized something strange. This was not the reaction of someone who did not understand danger. This was the reaction of someone who had faced it before. The professor raised his voice. "Class, remember this moment. The sound you heard was recorded from a beast that once made empires collapse. Entire colonies ran in terror when they heard such cries. Yet this human dismisses it as an animal from his home. What does this tell you?" An alien with scales raised her trembling hand. "It tells us humans are either mad, or their world is madness itself." Daniel laughed again, this time a little louder. "Maybe both." His words carried a strange pride. He leaned forward, his eyes catching the dim light of the room. "But if you want to test me, Professor, play the next sound." Gasps filled the hall. No one had ever asked for more. Every student looked at him, fear and curiosity mixing inside their hearts. Who was this human? Why did he smile in the face of monsters? Why did the galaxy's nightmare sound like nothing more than a memory of home to him? Professor Veyran hesitated. He had expected to break the human spirit, not feed it, but now the class was hooked. Every alien leaned closer, waiting. The tension grew like a storm about to strike, and Daniel, the human, just sat there with that same smirk. His calmness was heavier than fear. It was as if the predators from the recordings were not monsters to him at all, but familiar voices from a dangerous world he called home. The experiment had just begun, and already, the aliens were learning something terrifying. Humanity did not fear the galaxy's predators. Humanity lived with them. The first predator. The lecture hall was still heavy with silence after Daniel's casual remark. Aliens shifted nervously in their seats, their minds struggling to accept that the terrifying screech which had made their skin crawl was considered ordinary on Earth. For them, predator sounds belonged to the dark history of their ancestors, carefully preserved in recordings as a reminder of a time when they were weak. Yet here was a human student brushing it off like it was nothing more than a memory from a camping trip. The tension grew even thicker when Daniel leaned forward and invited the professor to play another sound. The students stared wide-eyed, their eyes glowing under the dim lights as if waiting for something catastrophic to happen. They expected the human to regret his words once the next predator was unleashed, but they did not understand that humans had grown up with danger woven into the fabric of their world. Professor Veyran narrowed his long eyes, his fingers moved across the control panel, his voice boomed across the hall. "Very well, human. Let us see how far your courage stretches." The first sound was of a predator feared by many races, but the next will test your very core. His tone carried authority, but even he could not hide the curiosity burning beneath it. With a slow motion he pressed the command, and the speakers roared to life once again. The sound that emerged was unlike the first. It started with a deep rumble, like rocks grinding together beneath the ground, then rose into a chilling shriek, sharp and unnatural, echoing with a hunger that pierced the mind. The alien students froze. Some clutched their seats. One covered her head with trembling arms. Another gasped loudly. The fear was alive in the room, crawling over every alien heart like cold claws. Yet, in the middle of this storm of terror, Daniel leaned back again. His expression had not changed. His eyes followed the glowing ceiling panels as if he were counting them. Then, as the shriek reached its peak, he gave a short laugh, not mocking, not cruel, but amused. He shook his head and muttered in a steady voice, "That's close, but still not enough. Sounds like a mountain lion when it's cornered." His words carried through the silence, slicing into the terror that gripped the aliens. For them, the name meant nothing, but the casual way he said it was worse than the sound itself. They looked at each other with confusion. What was a mountain lion? How could such a scream be compared to an animal that the human dismissed so easily? Professor Veyran's long arms tightened against his sides. His mind struggled to process the answer. He turned toward Daniel, his deep voice demanding clarity. "Explain yourself, human. Do you mean to say your world still holds creatures that can produce such horrifying cries?" Daniel met his gaze without hesitation. His smirk deepened. "Yes, Professor. On Earth we call them mountain lions or cougars. They live in forests, mountains, and deserts. They are ambush hunters, silent for hours, then fast and deadly. The sound you just played is what they make when they're fighting for territory or warning intruders. People in rural places sometimes hear it at night. Believe me, it's even scarier in the dark. But it's real, and it's normal for us." Gasps rippled through the hall. The alien students could not imagine a world where such predators were not only alive, but coexisted with the dominant species. To them, predators were legends. Their ancestors had exterminated them long ago or fled from their planets to survive. The idea that humans shared their home with apex hunters was beyond terrifying. It was madness, and yet Daniel spoke of it so casually, as if it was no more unusual than hearing the wind or the rain. One alien with silver skin raised her trembling voice. But how do your people live with such things? How can you build cities, raise children, and survive with predators roaming freely?" Daniel turned his gaze toward her. his eyes steady, his voice calm, because that's what shaped us. That's why we are here now. Our ancestors didn't remove the danger. They adapted. They learned to fight, to endure, to respect the predator and still move forward. Fear didn't destroy us. It trained us. His words struck like lightning. The aliens whispered. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others stared in awe. For the first time, they began to realize the truth hidden inside the human's smirk. He was not fearless because he had no reason to fear. He was fearless because his people had learned to carry fear and still keep walking. The sound of predators was not a memory of the past to humanity. It was the echo of their daily reality. Professor Veyran felt a shiver run down his spine. He had taught thousands of students, but never before had he seen such defiance wrapped in calmness. His test was supposed to expose the fragility of humans. Instead, it revealed their strength. He raised his voice again, trying to regain control of the room. Class, observe carefully, the human does not tremble, does not run. He does not deny fear. He recognizes it, yet treats it as ordinary. This is not arrogance. This is adaptation. This is survival carved into their very being. The students leaned closer now. Some no longer looked at Daniel with mockery, but with something far more dangerous: respect. In their eyes, the human was not weak. He was something else entirely, something forged by a world that refused to grow tame. The air in the hall shifted, curiosity mixing with fear, admiration growing in places where doubt had lived. And Daniel, the lone human in a hall full of alien eyes, simply smiled as if the universe's darkest nightmares were nothing more than familiar voices echoing from the wild places of Earth. The experiment was no longer just a test of fear. It was becoming a revelation. The galaxy was beginning to see what it meant to be human: alien curiosity and confusion. The lecture hall did not return to silence after Daniel's explanation. Instead, it became a storm of whispers, questions, and nervous murmurs. The alien students, who had walked into this lesson believing they were about to witness a fragile human break apart under the weight of fear, were now staring at him with a strange mixture of disbelief and fascination. His words lingered in their minds like echoes they could not escape. They had grown up in safe cities, protected by technology, shielded by laws that removed every form of threat. For them, survival meant following rules. But for the human sitting calmly in front of them, survival meant living every day in a world where death still prowled the forests, the mountains, and even the shadows of the night. Professor Veyran tried to quiet the room, but the flood of questions was impossible to stop. A student with pale feathers stood and shouted, "Is it true, human? Do your people live beside such beasts? Do you walk in the same forests where these monsters hunt?" Daniel gave him a calm look, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, we do. Sometimes people even see them near villages or small towns. We build our homes, raise our families, and we still know that cougars, wolves, or bears might wander close. Some people lose animals to them, sometimes even lives. But still, life goes on." The answer spread shock through the hall like fire through dry grass. Another student, her skin shimmering like glass, raised her trembling voice. "But why, human? Why not destroy them? Why not erase them the way we erased predators from our worlds?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady and soft. "Because they belong. Because Earth is not just ours. We share it with them. We don't destroy every danger we see. We learn to face it. We learn to live with it. That's why we are strong." Those words cut deeper than any roar from the speakers. The aliens exchanged worried looks. They could not imagine allowing predators to roam freely. The thought of tolerating such risk was insanity. Yet something about the humans' calm tone made their fear turn into something else. Something like admiration, one of the reptilian students whispered, almost to himself. If humans can grow up in such a place, what else are they capable of? The professor raised his long hand, silencing the room. His dark eyes never left Daniel. He spoke in a measured tone. "Your world sounds brutal. Tell us, human, do your people not live in constant fear?" Daniel's smirk softened, and for the first time, His expression turned serious. "Fear is always there, Professor, but we don't let it control us. We use it. We turn it into caution, into respect, into strength. You see fear as a weakness, but we see it as a teacher." The words rolled through the hall, settling heavy in the minds of every alien present. For their species, fear was a wound that had shaped their past. They had done everything to erase it, but the human spoke of fear as if it was an ally, a companion that walked beside them. That idea was unsettling, yet strangely powerful. The whispers returned, but this time they carried awe, not mockery. A young alien with translucent eyes spoke carefully. "Is that why humans explore the stars? Is that why you came here, not afraid of what you might find?" Daniel chuckled. "Maybe. We've always walked toward the unknown, even when it was dangerous, maybe because it was dangerous. It's just who we are." The class grew silent again, but this time it was not because of fear of predators. It was because of the realization dawning inside them. They began to see the human not as a fragile outsider, but as something forged by constant trial. He was living proof that fear, when embraced, did not destroy. It transformed. Professor Veyron could feel his carefully built lesson unraveling before his eyes. He had designed this experiment to expose humanity's weakness, to show his students that the species was fragile compared to the galaxy's ancient predators. Yet, instead, the human had turned the entire test into a demonstration of humanity's resilience. He stood silently for a long moment, studying the calm face of Daniel, then finally said in a low, thoughtful voice, "Perhaps we have much to learn from you, human. Perhaps your people are not weak, but something far more dangerous." Daniel only smirked again, the same calm smile that had unsettled them from the start. He leaned back in his chair as if he had already expected this outcome. His voice was light but carried a weight no one could ignore. "Or maybe you're only just beginning to understand us." And with those words, the entire hall seemed to shift. The aliens no longer looked at him with ridicule. Their eyes carried curiosity, respect, and something else. Something like caution. They had seen fear. They had seen calmness. But now they were beginning to see the truth of humanity. And that truth left them deeply unsettled. The lesson was no longer about predators. It had become something far greater. The experiment had revealed not the fragility of humanity, but the strength of a species that had walked with predators for thousands of years and still dared to laugh in the face of fear, testing the human. Further, the atmosphere inside the lecture hall had shifted in a way no one could have predicted. What was meant to be a controlled experiment to display human fragility had transformed into a spectacle of defiance and curiosity. The alien students no longer leaned back in disgust or fear. Instead, they leaned forward, eyes wide, eager to see how far this strange human would go. The whispers that once carried mockery were now laced with awe and something far more dangerous: respect. Professor Veyron, however, was not satisfied. He could not allow his authority, his carefully built lesson, to collapse before a single student's calm smile. The human had not broken under the first or second predator call, but there were far more terrifying sounds locked away in the Academy's archives. If Daniel was truly as strong as he appeared, then Veyron would push him to his limits. Veyron's long fingers hovered over the control panel. His voice carried across the hall like rolling thunder. "You may have dismissed the cougar and the mountain lion, human, but the galaxy holds predators far more terrifying than any simple beast from your forests." He pressed the command, and at once the speakers came alive. The sound that filled the room was violent, a roar that began deep in the belly of some monstrous creature and ended in a scream so sharp that it felt as though it tore through the bones of everyone listening. It was the call of a predator that had once hunted entire species to extinction. Its cry was so feared that colonies would evacuate upon the faintest echo. The alien students clutched their seats. One fell to the floor. Another closed her eyes tightly to block it out. The room shook not from the sound itself, but from the terror it planted in the hearts of those who heard it. But Daniel did not flinch. He tilted his head slightly as though analyzing the rhythm of the call. His eyes narrowed for a brief moment. Then he gave a small, almost amused grin. "Not bad," he said softly. but it still reminds me of something from home. Sounds like a bear when it's protecting its cubs." His words were casual, yet they struck harder than the roar itself. The aliens gasped. For them, the bear was just another unknown name, yet the tone of his voice told them everything. The human was once again connecting a galactic nightmare to a simple Earth predator. Worse, he was dismissing it as something familiar, something survivable. Professor Veyron's jaw tightened. "Impossible," he thundered. "You cannot compare this cry to something from your world. This beast destroyed fleets. Entire armies fled before it." Daniel leaned forward now, his voice calm but firm. "And yet you say it destroyed fleets because you were not prepared to face it. Humans don't get to escape predators. We learn to fight them, to live with them. That's the difference. Professor," the students felt their stomachs twist. His words were unsettling. They had been taught for generations that predators were to be feared, avoided, erased, yet the humans spoke of them as teachers, as part of existence. That idea shook the foundations of their beliefs. A reptilian student with sharp eyes raised his hand. "Human. You cannot mean your people fight such beasts bare-handed?" Daniel laughed lightly. "No. We use what we have, spears, traps, sometimes even fire. But the point is, we face them. We don't run every time we hear a roar. If we did, we wouldn't have survived long enough to sit in this classroom today." The hall grew colder with his words. The aliens began to realize that humanity's strength was not in the absence of fear, but in their ability to face it again and again until it no longer controlled them. Professor Veyron, however, was not ready to surrender. He adjusted the controls, his long arms moving quickly. "Then let us see if you still speak so boldly after the next one." The sound that followed was unlike any before. It was not just a roar, it was layered, beginning with a clicking sound that turned into a low moan, then rising suddenly into a piercing scream that carried the weight of despair and death. The walls of the lecture hall seemed to vibrate. Several alien students screamed aloud. One even collapsed back into his chair, trembling uncontrollably. For them, this was not just a sound. It was a memory etched in their very DNA, passed down from ancestors who had survived encounters with the beast. Daniel, however, leaned forward, his face thoughtful. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them slowly. His calm smile returned. "That one is closer still. It sounds like the call of a wolf pack at night. A little deeper, maybe. But close enough." The aliens were speechless. To compare one of the galaxy's deadliest predators to a mere animal from Earth was unthinkable. Yet the humans spoke the words with such certainty, such casual confidence, that it felt as though he truly believed it. The professor's long frame stiffened. His mind was racing. Each sound he played was supposed to strip away the human's calmness. But instead, it only revealed more layers of terrifying strength. If the human compared these cries to beasts from his home, then what kind of world was Earth truly? A world filled with predators as terrible as the galaxy's nightmares, yet still lived in by fragile-looking humans. The thought was almost too much to bear. Daniel looked around the room, his smirk never fading. "You wanted to see how far my courage stretches." "Professor, but this isn't courage. This is just normal for us. You don't understand, but on Earth, these kinds of sounds are not the end of the world. They're just part of the night." His voice was soft but powerful, and it struck every heart in the hall. The alien students stared at him as though seeing him for the first time. Their fear of the predator recordings was slowly turning into fear of something far more real, the human himself. They began to understand that humanity's strength was not in weapons or ships, but in the way they had been shaped by their homeworld, a planet where danger lived in every shadow. And yet humans still thrived, still built, still laughed. Professor Veyron looked at his class and realized he had lost control. The lesson was no longer his, it belonged to the human. And though he would never admit it aloud, even he felt a shiver run through him as he wondered what else humanity had faced and survived. And Daniel, the lone human, simply leaned back once more, his smirk brighter than before, as if daring the galaxy to throw its worst at him, confident that he would still be standing when the echoes faded. Fear turns into respect. The lecture hall felt different now. The echoes of predator roars still lingered in the air, but their power had weakened for the alien students. Those sounds had once been a reminder of nightmares buried in their species' histories. Yet, after watching the human dismiss them one by one, something inside their minds began to shift. They were no longer trembling only from fear of the predator recordings. They were trembling from the realization that the human sitting among them was not what they believed him to be. Daniel's calm smirk had unsettled them at first. It had seemed like arrogance, like a refusal to respect the danger of predators, but the longer he spoke, the clearer it became that his smile was not born from ignorance. It was the smile of someone who had lived with danger and learned to walk beside it. The aliens whispered to one another, their tones carrying awe instead of mockery. They began to see humanity not as fragile but as tempered. Like steel forged in the fires of fear, Professor Veyran, who had once stood proudly at the front of the hall as the unquestioned authority, now found his role shifting. His test was no longer a lesson about alien predators. It had become a revelation about humanity. He could sense the energy of his students turning, no longer looking to him for answers but instead staring at the human who had transformed their terror into something else. A student with scaled arms raised his hand, his voice low but steady. "Human! When you hear such sounds on your world, do you not freeze? Do you not feel terror the way we do?" Daniel's expression softened. His smirk faded into a more thoughtful look. "Of course we feel it. Fear is always there. But fear doesn't control us. It sharpens us. When you're out in the dark and you hear a cougar scream or a wolf howl, your heart races. You feel the weight of danger. But then you breathe. You remember who you are, and you keep moving forward. That is what it means to be human." The hall fell silent again. This time it was not the silence of shock, nor the silence of dread. It was the silence of understanding. The alien students were beginning to realize that the human's strength was not the absence of fear. It was the ability to stand with fear and still keep going. For them, fear was an enemy to be erased. For humans, fear was a companion, a teacher, another student. Her voice shaking asked, "But why, human? Why would your people continue to live with predators when you have the power to destroy them? Is it pride? Is it madness?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "It's survival, but it's also respect. We don't destroy everything that threatens us. Predators keep balance. They test us. They remind us that life is not meant to be safe all the time. If everything was easy, if everything was tame, we would grow weak on Earth. Danger never left us. And that's why we became what we are today." Those words struck deeply. The aliens could feel them settling into their bones. For generations they had sought comfort, safety, and control. They had built their civilizations to erase every shadow, every cry of the wild, but the humans' words revealed a terrible truth, that in erasing danger, they had also erased strength. The human had not mocked them. He had not insulted them. Yet his very presence, his calmness, was a mirror showing them their own fragility. Professor Veyran folded his arms. His long face was unreadable, but inside even he was shaken. He had expected to teach his students about the fear that once bound their ancestors. Instead, the human had taught them that fear was not chains, but fire. Fire that could either consume or forge, and humans, it seemed, had chosen to be forged. The alien students now looked at Daniel differently. Their wide eyes no longer filled only with confusion. They now carried something else, respect. Some of them nodded subtly, acknowledging what they had just witnessed. The whispers changed from disbelief to admiration. One voice in the back said quietly, "Perhaps this is why humans are explorers. Perhaps this is why they dare to walk among stars that terrify us." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his smirk returning, not out of arrogance but with a strange humility. He did not boast, he did not shout, he simply sat as if all of this was normal, as if his words were nothing more than truth. His calmness was more powerful than any roar, more terrifying than any predator's cry, because it showed that humans were something the galaxy had never fully understood. Professor Veyran finally spoke again, his tone softer than before. Class, observe what you have learned today. The predators we studied were meant to teach fear. Yet the human has shown us that fear is not always weakness. Fear, when carried properly, becomes strength. Humanity may look fragile, but it is forged from a world that has never stopped testing them. The students nodded slowly. Some still trembled at the memory of the predator cries, but now they trembled for another reason. They understood that humanity's survival was not luck. It was not chance. It was the result of thousands of years of living with shadows, with roars in the night, with claws scratching just beyond the firelight. And instead of running forever, humans had learned to stand. In that moment, fear turned into respect. The aliens looked at Daniel and no longer saw only a student from a distant planet. They saw the embodiment of a species that had been shaped by danger into something stronger than they could have imagined. They saw a reminder that survival was not about safety, but about courage. And Daniel, the lone human in a hall of alien eyes, simply nodded to himself, as if he had seen this reaction many times before, as if he had always known that sooner or later the galaxy would have to accept the truth. Humanity was not fragile. Humanity was fire wrapped in flesh. The hidden truth of Earth, the silence that followed, was heavy. It was the kind of silence that did not come from fear alone, but from realization. The alien students were no longer looking at Daniel as though he were an oddity or an experiment. They were looking at him as though he were a window into a world they could not begin to comprehend. A world where predators still walked under the same sun as cities, where danger was not a forgotten history but a living reality. For the first time, the aliens began to ask themselves a terrifying question. If this was the kind of world humans came from, then what else had Earth been hiding? Professor Veyron's long arms folded behind his back. His voice was careful now, no longer booming with authority but searching, almost cautious. Human, tell us more about your world. If these cougars and mountain lions are truly real, if your people hear their cries in the night, then what else lurks upon Earth? What else has shaped you into what you are? The students leaned forward, eager and afraid at once, their eyes fixed on Daniel like he was carrying secrets too powerful to be spoken. Daniel let the silence stretch. He seemed to enjoy watching the curiosity twist into nervous anticipation. Then he leaned forward, his voice calm but deep. You want to know the truth about Earth? Then listen carefully. Earth is not a world of safety. It is not a world where danger exists only in old stories. Every corner of our planet has its own predators, and every human grows up knowing that something out there is stronger, faster, or hungrier than them. The alien shifted uneasily, and Daniel continued. In the forests, cougars and wolves stalk silently. Bears roam the mountains weighing hundreds of kilos. Their claws can crush bones with a single swipe. In the oceans, sharks still hunt, not just small ones but giants, capable of tearing ships apart in ancient times. In the skies, eagles and hawks dive with talons sharp enough to pierce through flesh. Even in the rivers and swamps, crocodiles and alligators wait beneath the surface, jaws strong enough to drag down anything that comes too close. On Earth, danger never left. It is everywhere. It is part of life. Gasps filled the hall. The alien students stared at him as if he were describing a nightmare world. For them, oceans were safe, skies were free, forests were controlled, but Daniel's words painted a picture of a planet where survival was a constant challenge. One student whispered shakily, "Impossible. No species could thrive in such a place. They would be wiped out." Daniel's eyes glinted with something sharp. "And yet we didn't get wiped out. We thrived. We built. We rose to the stars while still living alongside them. That's the difference between us and you." The students fell silent again. Every sentence dug deeper into their understanding. They had been taught to see humanity as fragile flesh, weak compared to armored species or venomous creatures from other planets. Yet the truth was different. Humanity had been shaped by a living crucible. Earth was not just a home, it was a test that never ended. And every human alive was proof that they had passed it. Generation after generation, Professor Veyron's dark eyes narrowed. He felt something inside him stir, something he had not felt in centuries. respect mixed with unease. He spoke slowly. "You mean to say that predators still walk freely on your planet, that your people do not cage them or destroy them, but allow them to live. And despite that, you continue to build, to rise, to spread beyond your world?" Daniel nodded once, his smirk returning. "Exactly. That is what you don't understand. We never conquered Earth. Earth conquered us. It shaped us into what we are, and now, when you play these sounds to scare us, we don't hear nightmares. We hear home." Those words rolled across the hall like thunder. The alien students shivered, not because of predator cries this time, but because of the hidden truth they were only beginning to grasp. The galaxy had believed humans were weak. The galaxy had underestimated them because of their small size, their soft skin, their lack of claws or scales, but the truth was that humans were forged in a world far harsher than most planets could ever imagine. One alien student with crystalline skin whispered to the one beside her, "If humans grew strong under such conditions, then what happens when they face the galaxy itself?" The other did not answer, because the answer was already obvious. Daniel leaned back once again, his arms folded casually. His calmness was a weapon sharper than any blade. His smile was not arrogance but a reminder. You see predators as things to fear. We see them as things that shaped us. That is the difference. That is why when you hear their screams, you tremble. But when we hear them, we smirk. Because for us, it is only Tuesday night in the wild. The aliens felt their throats tighten. Respect grew heavier than fear now. They began to understand that the humans' calmness was not an act. It was the reflection of an entire species that had been tested again and again and had never stopped surviving. Earth was no ordinary planet. It was a battlefield disguised as a homeworld, and the humans were its undefeated champions. The hidden truth of Earth was no longer hidden, and for the aliens who sat in that hall, listening to Daniel's calm voice, it was more terrifying than any predator roar the professor could ever play. The smirk that shook the class. The lecture hall was no longer a place of learning. It had become an arena, a place where the fragile illusions of superiority had been shattered and replaced with something raw and unsettling. For generations, the alien races had believed that predators were relics of their past, that true civilization meant removing danger, erasing fear, and living behind walls of safety. But as Daniel sat in the center of their attention, calm and unshaken, they began to realize that perhaps they had chosen the weaker path. They had escaped fear while humans had embraced it. Professor Veyran stood rigid at the front, his elongated fingers twitching above the control panel. He had played roar after roar, scream after scream, sounds that had once made soldiers abandon their weapons and flee into the void. Yet nothing had broken the human. Instead, each cry had been met with a calm remark, a comparison to something from Earth, something real, something that humanity had already faced and survived. The professor's voice was strained as he finally spoke. "You have dismissed every predator I have shown you. You have turned fear into mockery. Do you mean to say there is nothing in this galaxy that could shake a human?" Daniel's smirk widened just slightly, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "I didn't dismiss them, Professor. I recognized them. That's the difference. They may terrify you, but to us they sound familiar. We've lived with things like that our whole history. If you want to shake us, you'll need more than screams from the past." His voice was steady, but the weight of his words rippled through the room. Veyran's pride burned inside him. He refused to let this moment end with his defeat. He reached deep into the archives, selecting a sound rarely played, one so dreadful it was forbidden for younger students. It was the cry of a predator that had not only destroyed colonies but was said to drive survivors into madness. His hand trembled as he activated it. The hall grew darker, the lights dimming as if the room itself feared what was about to come. The sound began low, almost like breathing, slow and heavy. Then it grew into a grinding noise as though claws dragged against stone. Suddenly, a shriek split the air, not once but again and again, overlapping, rising into a storm of terror. It was not one predator but many, voices layered into a nightmare chorus. The alien students screamed, some covered their ears. Others collapsed to the floor in trembling heaps. Their bodies shook as the sound rattled their very bones. It was a sound meant to remind every listener that they were prey, but in the center of it all sat Daniel, unmoving, his eyes closed, his breathing steady. For a moment, the professor thought the human had finally broken. But then, as the screams reached their climax, Daniel opened his eyes slowly, calm as ever. He leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees, and with a quiet laugh said, "On Earth. That's just what a pack of coyotes sounds like when they sing together at night." The hall froze. The students' wide eyes filled with disbelief. Coyotes? Another predator? Another beast from Earth? How many did this world hold? How could one planet produce so many creatures that mirrored the galaxy's nightmares? Daniel's words were casual, but they carried the weight of a hammer striking the fragile glass of their assumptions. The fear in the room transformed, twisting into something far stronger, respect mixed with unease. Professor Veyran's voice cracked as he whispered, "Impossible. Your world cannot be so full of monsters." Daniel met his gaze firmly, his smirk turning into something sharper. "It is, Professor, and that is why we are what we are. We didn't run, we didn't erase them, we lived with them. And every time you play a sound to scare me, all I hear is home." The students sat in stunned silence. For the first time in their lives, they realized that the galaxy's so-called fragile species was not fragile at all. Humanity was something else, something forged by shadows, screams, and roars. They looked at Daniel and no longer saw prey. They saw a predator in human skin, not because he hunted, but because he had learned to live with hunters and survive. One student whispered quietly, his voice trembling, "If humans can laugh at the galaxy's nightmares, then what chance do we have if we ever stand against them?" The question lingered in the air. No one dared to answer. But the silence was heavy with truth. Professor Veyran stepped back from the console, his pride broken, his lesson destroyed, yet even he could not deny the power of what he had witnessed. The human had not shouted, had not threatened, he had only smiled, compared, and survived. And that was enough to shake the entire class more than any roar ever could. Daniel leaned back one last time. Folding his arms across his chest, his smirk lingered, the kind of smirk that carried both confidence and warning. He looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of every alien who stared at him in awe, and spoke softly. "The galaxy fears predators because it has forgotten them. Humanity doesn't forget. Humanity never forgets. That's why we endure." The words sank deep. The lecture hall, once filled with fear of ancient predators, was now filled with something new, something more dangerous. The students no longer feared the roars of the past. They feared the calm smirk of the human in front of them, because in that smirk was the truth of Earth, the truth of humanity. And that truth was more terrifying than any predator the galaxy had ever known.